It's Emmy nomination season. Last Sunday in Los Angeles, I interviewed the film teams behind 5 feature documentaries for your consideration. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Our podcast teamed with the entertainment newsletter The Ankler for an event at Neuhaus on Sunset Boulevard. We recorded these interviews in front of a live audience. In this program, we'll hear from the teams of Spermworld about the unregulated world of sperm donation, Jim Henson Idea Man about the creator of the Muppets, The Greatest Night in Pop about recording We Are the World, and in Restless Dreams, the music of Paul Simon. Our first interview is for the film Stormy, about the adult film actress and director Stormy Daniels. In 2006, she had a sexual encounter with Donald Trump that threw her life into turmoil. 10 years later, just before the 2016 election, Trump tried to cover it up with hush money. Those actions recently caused a New York jury to convict him on 34 counts of trying to illegally influence the presidential election. The film follows Stormy over a period of several years as she copes with the betrayal of multiple people. Every time Stormy is in the news, she faces death threats and other harassment from Trump supporters. The film captures a chilling moment when she tries visiting Canada and discovers that she has a falsified FBI record with invented allegations. Here she is in the film's trailer.
Just wanted to stand up for myself.
You never saw my name that didn't say porn star in front of it. Because we're not considered human. I won't give up because I'm telling the truth. I'm out of
Now streaming on Peacock, Stormy is directed by Sarah Gibson, who previously made Orgasm Inc., The Story of One Taste. Prior to being a director, Sarah had a long career as a producer. Her producing credits include Britney vs. Spears, directed by Erin Lee Carr. For Stormy, they exchanged roles, with Erin serving as producer. Both Sarah and Erin joined me on stage. I started by asking Sarah how this project came to be.
So I met Stormy on a comedy project in 2019, and she left the set of the project we were on and got stopped at the Canadian border with 17 false charges on her FBI record. And she got in touch with me from the airport and told me what had happened, and it seemed unbelievable.
So this is in 2019. She's already been in the kind of eye of the storm of news around Donald Trump, and this happens.
Right, and we just kept in touch after that, and she went to trial against Michael Avenatti, and it was in the midst of that I reached out to her, and I said, hey, Erin and I just made a film about Britney Spears and the justice system not working equally for her. If you ever want to tell your story, we're here. And she said, people have tried to make a documentary about me before and haven't been successful. And I said, who tried? And she said, this guy and that guy and this guy. And I said, have women ever tried?
So many guys.
And she said, no. And I said, give Erin and I a shot. And here we are.
So, Erin, on your film, Britney vs. Spears, that you directed, Sarah was a producer on that. Sarah's been a producer on many great documentaries over the years, and in recent years has been directing your own project, Sarah. But, Erin, what are the qualities that you see in Sarah as a director and producer that made her so right for this?
Oh my God, I love that question. Sarah is true blue. We like to think of Sarah kind of leads with her heart and I lead with my brain. I was able to be mentored by my dad, journalist David Carr, and I watched him. Thank you. I will always bring him up. But it's just we're just kind of this perfect mixture of, she just is every time she's in an edit, she's like, how would this person feel about this edit? I'm like, it doesn't matter how they feel. How does the edit feel? And so, it just was so amazing to see. Stormy doesn't trust anyone. And she lets very few people into her life, and to watch Sarah Gibson like really tend to this relationship and be sensitive and be thoughtful and not push. Potentially times where I would have pushed at the beginning and shooting and things like that, but Stormy has to sort of come to you. And so it was truly, I think, only Sarah who would have been able to do this, to start this, and to finish this.
So Sarah, I talked about the way in which Stormy Daniels has been betrayed by a lot of people in her life. She talks about ways in which she felt betrayed by her mother, her lawyer, Michael Avenatti, that you mentioned before, who really kind of leveraged her as a client to gain a lot of attention for himself, then stole money from her. What did that mean for her as you approached her as a film subject?
Well, the Michael Avenatti story, we used to always say that this was a tale of the two Michaels. There was Michael Cohen and Michael Avenatti, and Michael Avenatti started as an enemy, or sorry, Michael Avenatti started as a friend and ended up an enemy, and Michael Cohen started as an enemy and has ended up a friend. So we talked a lot about that, and I think the Avenatti story really, really hurt her deeply, and it continues to affect her life to this day. Michael Avenatti filed a defamation suit against Donald Trump without her permission. He called her a con job. Now she tried to sue him over that, or Michael Avenatti did. And then now she owes Trump's lawyers $600,000.
Still owes him after he got 37 counts.
34 counts, I think.
Thank you so much. I am a documentary filmmaker. I know all the facts. It's been a busy day. Yeah, I think that it's just, as we sit here today, and the fact that she owes Trump more than $600,000 for a lawsuit that Michael Avenatti did, I mean, we have to wonder, like, how does the criminal justice system take everything from her and say, please help us with this case, show up, there's security issues, but still she's on the losing end of this situation, and there's no remedy, right? It's not like this money is gonna go away or anything. She's under constant threat of losing her house, anything like that, because she owes Trump this money. And she said, I will go to prison before paying him a penny. And so I clap for that, but I'm scared. I'm really scared that this person will have to go to prison because she doesn't want to pay this person that put her in this situation. So it's like, I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to talk about this amazing documentary, but it's just, there's so many issues still at play.
Well, I want to ask about the way the justice system has been weaponized against Stormy Daniels. You described that, when you first embarked on this project, she had gone to Canada to do some appearances. This is covered in the film. It was an eye-opening moment for me in the film. She gets to the border, and the border guard looks up and says, we have an FBI report here that says you're wanted on 17 assault charges. These were made-up assault charges. Somehow, I think, judging from your film, we don't actually know how, but these made it into FBI records. It really makes you wonder how a government can exert pressure on people that it has deemed an enemy. I mean, can you reflect on the way Stormy Daniels' experiences might show how any of us can be in jeopardy if we make an enemy of people in government?
Sure. I mean, she was at a strip club in Ohio in 2018. Summer 28. She was sort of set up in a sting where undercover cops were at the strip club and acted like they were her fans, and she, did her usual show, and afterwards it turned out that the cops were undercover, and they came to arrest her, and they were all Trump supporters, and she was put in prison. She eventually got out. She eventually sued the Ohio Police Department for false incarceration, and she ended up winning $450,000 settlement from them because it was deemed that they were Trump supporters and had arrested her incorrectly. So she's constantly, looking over her shoulder, and that continues to this day. And she's really, really concerned if, the elections go a certain way in November, what's going to happen to her.
So your film ends before the events that have taken place over the last few weeks of the trial. Can you talk about, have you been staying in touch, and what have you been observing of the way she's experienced this?
So she's, vindicated on one hand and really angry on another, and really hopes, Donald Trump gets jail time for this. The day of when they announced all of the convictions, she was texting me photos of her and her daughter, and that was really meaningful because in the beginning when we started talking about making the film, I said, why would you want to do this? And she said, I want to do it for my daughter, so that if I don't make it through this, my daughter has a document of what happened to me.
What is next for Stormy Daniels?
Well, she's really, really excited about breaking into mainstream film. She has directed...
To be clear, we always refer to her as an adult film actress, but she was a director in that world and has for a long time talked about wanting to expand her creative output in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, she loves horror films, she loves thrillers, she really wants to direct in that genre, and she is directing her own short films right now. She's writing a couple of new books. She's really excited to move on with her life, but she also knows that now she's a part of history. She's a legend, and who knows what she'll be able to do after this.
Erin, you have a long career of making films about people in legal cases and crimes, and what was unique about this project and the legal machinations around Stormy Daniels' life?
Yeah, I think that for us, it really was when you said Stormy Daniels, everybody had this reaction as like gold digger, or she did it for attention, and is in so much an analogy about how we feel about women speaking up, right? And so it was for me in terms of the legal stuff. I knew that the trial was going to be upcoming, but it was all about like what it's like for her to prepare for that and still trying to live her life. And so I love working on criminal justice cases, and people think that true crime potentially is like lower brow, but to me it's not. It has everything. It has life, it has death, it has the stakes. You're wondering what happens. There's the ambiguity. I saw Andrew Jarecki in the crowd who just did Jinx 2, which is like, his work with capturing the Friedmans and Jinx 2 taught me so much about stakes and judgment and all of these things. And so I will work on criminal justice films forever. And if it's labeled true crime, I'm proud for it to be labeled true crime. But I think that one of the aspects that we're living in now is that I think audience members can continue to feel like they're the jury. And it really now, just like with Depp versus Heard or all of this stuff, like we get into the criminal justice system and we have opinions. We have to respect what the jury does, but I think that we're at this time where people are starting to understand how flawed, how corrupt, how institutionally bankrupt this system is. And thank you. And I think that is what is great about true crime, and I'm just so proud and so grateful for the work.
Sarah, Erin talked about the way people have a surface impression of Stormy Daniels. I wonder before you met her, if you had an impression and how making this changed your impression.
I saw her on television during the Stormy Daniels Day in West Hollywood that was given to her on May 23rd, 2018, right after the story broke. And I heard her speaking there. And there was a moment where I thought, wow, this woman's really ballsy. And I think Trump has met his match in her. That was the first thing I thought. And getting to know her more over all these years, with all of the pressure she's been under and all of the ups and downs of making this film, I have my admiration for her courage and her just her authenticity, it has just grown. Like, she is who she is.
And also that we got to work with Peacock. I mean, I think that when we were out pitching this film, people were like, sounds amazing. Not sure I want to jump in on that, you know? Erica here is from Peacock, and we pitched her and a bunch of people, and we just needed somebody to give us a chance. And I think that anybody, Sarah's not somebody who's nervous, but when I thought about the legal ramifications of this, I was like, how much insurance can we get? You know, I was just like, oh God, what's gonna happen? And so I just wanna be really, grateful to Peacock for putting this out there, because this was, it was the story, and then now that we've seen the 34 counts guilty, but this is such a moment in history that captured that time as we led up to it. So anybody who took part in this, it was really stressful, especially for Stormy, but it was really difficult to get people on board.
That was producer Erin Carr speaking alongside director Sarah Gibson. Their film Stormy is now streaming on Peacock. Now we turn to Spermworld from FX. It's an intimate portrait of three men who are sperm donors. They don't work through a traditional sperm bank. They're independent, connecting with clients online.
Donating sperm makes me feel good.
Sperm banks have a lot of issues. We're the competition out there.
You have a good one.
We're just online donors. That's all we're doing.
We get to know some of the women seeking this service out of their deep desire to have a child. Director Lance Oppenheim previously made Some Kind of Heaven, an observational portrait of Florida's retirement community, The Villages. He has a knack for capturing people during intimate moments. Many scenes of Spermworld are shot in dark motel rooms where transactions take place. Lance was joined on stage by the film's executive producer, Kathleen Lingo, formerly of the New York Times. I asked Lance how he gained access to these sensitive moments.
Well, it's always interesting, and I sometimes wonder if most documentary participants all are binded by the same desire. In this case, I think a lot of people who are part of this community, the unregulated sperm donation, Facebook groups, I think all of them really wanted to be seen, and that's really the theme of the movie in a way. It's about people who want to be bigger than life. The men are kind of at this point in their lives where they're not sure what life really means, and I think that's why they're compulsively masturbating for others and giving them, hope in a way. And I think a lot of the women are at a different point in their lives too, where they're looking for meaning through the act of having a child, and this is something that they've pursued so much at different places, and it hasn't worked out. And so I think there was a really extensive kind of casting process on Facebook and elsewhere, and we talked to a lot of people, and usually for me the first thing happens, I say, hey, I'm interested in these parts of your life and I want to make a movie about that. Are you interested? And if people say yes, we begin. If they say no, then we don't. And that's kind of the way the cookie crumbles.
Masturbating for hope. Is that on a swag t-shirt? It should be.
We can make a hat for you if you want.
Kathleen, you're in a different part of your career now, but when you were working on this, you were at the New York Times, where you were for a long time, working on a lot of great projects. As I understand it, this project was inspired by a New York Times article. Can you talk about how it went from article and to film, and why Lance was the right person to do this?
Yeah, so Lance and I go way back. This was actually our 6th film together because we started working together at OpDocs. And this is our 2nd feature doc. The first one was Some Kind of Heaven. And after that was done, we wanted to find something else to do together. And so there was a reporter named Nellie Bowles, who is a tech reporter based in San Francisco, who's this really brilliant woman. And I introduced them with the hopes that they would come up with an idea. And they actually came to me. Nellie had been researching how to find sperm. Nellie's married to a woman, so they needed sperm. It was during the pandemic. And being a tech reporter, she, of course, looked online. And in doing that research, found the Facebook groups and then told Lance about it. And that was sort of the genesis of this project. So essentially, Lance even has a byline on the bottom of the article in the New York Times because the two of them started working on it together from the very, very early stages.
I mean, one of the poignant things about the film is you follow these characters over several months. We see an evolution in their lives. You get a little bit from this couple who are trying to have a baby while he is being a donor himself, and you watch those efforts over a period of time. When you started out with them, did you know like how much time you were going to be able to give or needed to give?
I mean, I think every documentary filmmaker hopes to just be filming forever, really, right? I think that's like, in this case, we filmed, I mean, this was many years of shooting. We started this in 2020, the end of 2020, and we finished filming, I think, at the end of 2023. And so,
If you're Andrew Jarecki, you've got 18 more years to go.
Yes, for sure. Well, every film requires a different level of engagement. I think for us, I make films that are present tense and things unfold naturally and actively. And if I do the job right, then I'm able to sort of enmesh myself in the inner lives and the worlds of people that let us in. And so I think in this case, we had to wait, and we had to have time to let life play out the way it would. And in a weird way, I mean, the first donation scene in the film, there were literal children that were born from this process. There was a child that I think is 3.5 years old that was a result of two people meeting up in a motel room at the middle of the night. When we were there, sperm was transacted, child exists. And I remember at the end of the process of filming this, we had filmed that donation. It was the first thing we had shot. And then I remember one of the last things we shot was the mother playing with that child. And it was crazy. It was so surreal to see literally time actualized in the life of this no longer an infant, but a 3.5-year-old.
Describe to me what it's like to be in the room. I mean, in some cases you're filming multiple points of view. Did you have multiple cameras, or what's the setup like in that room?
No, I mean, in this case, it's all one camera, and I like to shoot that way normally just to, especially in really intimate situations, to prioritize this sense of feeling a little, I guess the camera's presence to announce itself a little less. I feel like if you have 10 bodies in a tiny motel room, then look, every time you introduce a camera into any world, you're manipulating the reality already. But I always am sort of like, how do we just make ourselves small enough that we can be there and people will know we're there and they'll know what we're filming. But anyway, look, long story short, it's incredibly awkward. It's awkward for every person, even if there wasn't a camera there. These are people that are meeting each other for the first time and trying to find the most immediate way of endearing themselves to each other. There's a lot of small talk. Hey, how are you? Good. Okay, how do you want to do this? Okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to watch some pornography. I'll come back. Hope this works. Okay, great. See you later. Bye. Then that's it. So I think for us, a lot of it was how do we just bear witness to a lot of those things? And, we usually start pretty wide and kind of let the conversation flow, and then eventually it dies down, and then we move the camera in and kind of start to get coverage. And if there's certain moments in the conversation that I thought were interesting, I'll try and prompt people to kind of get back to that point of contact, and hopefully new conversations and tendrils will kind of emerge.
Kathleen, I understand like the kind of irresistibility of this as a subject when you started. And then there are themes that start to emerge in the film. There's a theme of mortality and what it means to pass your genes along to a next generation. And I wonder how much you sense those themes were going to be there from the beginning and how much they emerged along the way.
Well, the premise of this documentary, I think, would be irresistible to many filmmakers and in many different genres. And indeed, when we were developing this, there were a bunch of reality TV producers also circling some of our subjects. But what I think makes the film unique, not to sound like a fangirl, but is Lance's humanity as a director. And I think even though these subjects, are sort of extreme examples of humanity, the film really tries to take a non-judgmental approach and really leave it up to the audience for us all to judge. So as we were making the film, we were really trying to present these characters as they were, for the good and the bad, and it was constantly about sort of creating that balance to not sort of over-sensationalize, but also not to under-sensationalize, because a lot of the notes were like, okay, well, I feel like so much of filmmaking is what you leave out, of course. So we were always trying to sort of have that balance where, yeah, there were some maybe more salacious things or less salacious things, but how do we give an impression of this world and these people that's honest and true without sort of tilting it too far in one direction?
Lance, when I watch this film and your other films, you have a deliberate stylistic approach. I feel like if I saw one of your films without seeing your name on it, I would know that this is a Lance Oppenheim film. And I wonder if you can talk about, what you're trying to do visually and in pacing and in how you deal with characters that make something a Lance Oppenheim film.
Well, that's nice of you to say. Thanks. I think, look, the first thing for me is always I start with the setting and I start to just look around. In this case with Spermworld, it was a tone that made me kind of want to make the movie. I was on the Facebook groups and I was looking at posts, and people would post these extremely intimate, revealing, vulnerable things about their lives, and then a guy would respond with a thumbs up emoji. And so I thought that there was something so poignant about that in a weird way. It felt like I was at all these people were at the edge of the world. They all felt like they were forgotten or lost in some way, and you have women who have very relatable dreams and desires, and you have men who have really strange dreams and desires, and yet they're meeting at one point, and no matter how awkward or uncomfortable that dynamic is, they're there for each other. So I thought there was something really beautiful about that. In terms of the style and everything, I think it always comes off of riffing off the lives and the dreams of the people in the films. In this case, they were in dark situations, so I felt the film had to aesthetically mirror that, but there was also this kind of halo of hope that would, sometimes emerge literally when I'd be looking at the sperm sample. It almost felt like this halation, this like a ghostly, dreamy thing that was going on. And then in, the other films, it's always about how do I take all of the bells and whistles of all the cinematic tools that we have in our arsenal and immerse ourselves not just in observing someone, but really inhabiting that same subjectivity of where they are, how they view their lives. In this film, there's a character who has 180 children, and a lot of people were very upset with him all the time. But the way I wanted to present that was the way he sees it, which is like a screwball comedy. His life is one never-ending merry-go-round of people mudslinging at him, and he just laughs it off. And so I thought, to me, that's an important way of presenting another form of, I guess, documentary truth, is to understand someone, get to know them well enough, as well as they know themselves, and then project that for people to experience.
So the film premiered just a few months ago at the South by Southwest Film Festival and has now been out in the world. What has it meant for the people in the film to have their stories told?
Well, interestingly, I think because I make these films that are extremely collaborative with the people in them, and I have to explain at every moment in time, look, the camera's going to start here. I want to be shooting what is going on in your life, and I'm going to eventually go in, and if there's a moment that feels uncomfortable, I'll explain to you why I want to capture that. I think because there's that level of collaboration and engagement, it's like there's moments with another person in the film he's very interested in movies. I bought him the Paul Schrader Transcendental Cinema book to try and explain to him the sort of formal approach or the feeling. And I constantly show people clips and scenes of what they would, how the thing was being cut together. So when they watched it, I think we all felt like we had succeeded maybe in creating sort of an artistic expression of their life, right? And because so many of these folks were already looking to be bigger than life, to mean something, to justify their existence in the world, I think being a part of a film that hopefully could touch a lot of people, it resonated with them. And all the moments that I laughed while making the movie, they laugh while they watch the movie. And I think sometimes for an audience, it's like, am I supposed to have fun with this? Am I supposed to be laughing? What's the tone of this? I think the tone of it is exactly what you see, and every expression, aghast, hilarity, I don't know, all of those things. There's no one wrong way to watch something. Yeah.
But I also just want to quickly add, I think the overall sentiment among the subjects is none of them were surprised by the movie because Lance had done such a good job of talking with them, so it wasn't like they were like, wait, what? The movie really does faithfully capture their lives and is the movie that we intended to make.
That was executive producer Kathleen Lingo speaking with director Lance Oppenheim. Their film Spermworld, produced by the New York Times and FX, is now streaming on Hulu. Our next film is Jim Henson, Idea Man, directed by Ron Howard, profiling the creative genius behind the Muppets. Henson was instrumental to Sesame Street and constantly innovating with projects like The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth before he died of pneumonia at age 53. The film shows how he started out working in partnership with his wife Jane and how he handled both success and disappointments. Henson had 4 children. 2 of them are instrumental in continuing the Jim Henson Company today. Lisa Henson is the CEO, and Brian Henson is chairman of the board. We hear them in this clip of the trailer.
And everything was getting a little bit bigger.
Becoming famous was what he wanted, that there was an innocence getting lost. Was going to impact his relationship with us and everything, and that was complex.
He wanted to do more than is humanly possible.
That idea that time could run out
was just unthinkable.
Lisa and Brian Henson sat down with me in Los Angeles. They were joined on stage by the film's producer, Justin Wilkes, the president of Ron Howard's company, Imagine Entertainment. I asked Justin how this project originated for Ron to direct.
Marjan from Disney, who's in the house. Let's give her an applause, because she really...
Marjan Javadi, she's out there
Marjan
somewhere.
Javadi,
Yeah.
I can't see her now. This was a project that's been in the works for 2+ years at this point. Marjan had tipped us off that Disney would love to do a doc about Jim, and historically the family, and they can speak to this, had said no for various reasons over the years. And she thought maybe with us and with Ron approaching them, maybe there'd be a window into it. So she made an introduction, and I'll tell my side of the story, then you can tell your side of the story, because it's fun. So we ended up on a Zoom, and we were, it was known at the beginning of the Zoom that really the family was still not interested in making a doc, but because it was Ron, they were at least gonna hear him out. The worst that could come with it, they all get to meet Ron. And over the course of the hour or so that we were all on, and it was with your other 2 siblings as well, we started to see texting going on. There was texting on, but you could tell they were texting each other. It was, yeah, and by the end of it, Brian spoke up and said, look, we all went into this not thinking we were actually going to do it, but Ron, over the course of just this conversation, you really remind us of a lot of the attributes that our father had, and we'd be honored to have you make the film. That was my memory of it, at least.
Well, I think some things happened sort of serendipitous. Oh, I'm losing the word. Serendipitous, thank you. Well, yes, Marjan Disney wanted to do a documentary about Jim, and Lisa and I felt particularly, because we're the ones most active out here, that we really needed a really good filmmaker, and somebody who could, as Lisa would say, it should look like a documentary that Jim Henson made, that it needs to have that level of craftsmanship, which is not what you think of as a documentary. And we said, really, it has to be the very, very top tier of filmmaker before we would even consider it. I don't know that we went into that call thinking we're unlikely to approve Ron. I don't know that's
You just made us
really
sweat
true.
it out.
That was probably us just protecting ourselves a little bit, because honestly, when we said to Marjan, it needs to be super top tier, then quite quickly she came back saying that Ron was interested, and then we were very excited about that meeting.
I was just going to say that after the Fred Rogers documentary came out, we were the low-hanging fruit. So we were approached by many, many people, and that was part of it was sort of the exhaustion of fielding a lot of requests about a documentary and not knowing those filmmakers, and then we just thought, well, there only will be one major documentary that we will give the archives to, that we're going to surrender to somebody's vision. And I, in particular, was extremely touched by Marty Scorsese's documentary about George Harrison, and went away thinking, ever since that movie came out, there must be a filmmaker of that level that would care creatively for what Jim Henson did, and not just see it as like a really good gig to get after Fred Rogers.
So can you talk about the qualities that you experienced in Ron and in his engagement that made you think this is the one?
Well, he really reminds me of Jim. He reminded all of us of Jim. His enthusiasm, his openness. There's no disguise with Ron. He's so genuine, and that was very much like my dad. Very open, very excited about ideas, and really he really did remind us of our dad, and he's one of the greatest filmmakers, perhaps, in his type of film making, the greatest filmmaker in the world. So. And he really latched into the idea of let's be very imaginative in the way the film is made.
So, Lisa, all kinds of choices have to be made. This is a big life and a very busy life. So when you watch the final film, what comes across to you, or what, and maybe were the things that surprised you about seeing it in this package?
Well, since we were not producers of it, and we really didn't want to be producers of it, we were hoping for some good surprises. And when we first saw the movie, I had not seen the first footage, which was from a Norman C. photo session that's extraordinary. I had not seen the second scene, which was a Orson Welles extremely funny interview with Jim and Frank, and I was like, we are off to the races. Like, they've dug deep.
You've been immersed in this world all your life, and they were already showing you stuff you had never seen.
Right from the start.
And I think what was, for me, what was so special looking at the documentary, well, first of all, there were quite a few television documentaries made right after Jim died, and they were so much about the death of Jim Henson, the unexpected death of Jim Henson. So we stopped and said, no more documentaries. And we waited a long, long time until now. When I saw the documentary, I just thought what Ron did was so wonderful, because he's emotional. He's an emotional filmmaker. And it's really about Jim Henson and Frank Oz's working relationship and Jim Henson and Jane Henson's working relationship and marriage. So it's really keying off of those two very emotional relationships that were my dad's most important relationships probably in his life. And I thought that was really wonderful, and a way to, because you could honestly make a 20-hour documentary about Jim Henson. So it was really a way to make, a feature-length documentary that's very satisfying.
Justin, Lisa's just described that your team was able to pull in things that she had never seen before. What was that undertaking like?
the family had done an amazing job with the archive that you had. And Jim, in addition to everything that he put out into the world, home movie footage, this red book, sort of a diary that he kept, a journal that he kept, all that had been beautifully preserved by the family. So it was, I worked on this, as you know, the Louis Armstrong doc a couple years ago with Sasha Jenkins, and it was sort of the opposite, where there wasn't really one contained archive. There was audio, but we had to go out in the world. That said, and actually you referenced the George Harrison movie, the connective tissue there is our producing partner, Margaret Bodie, who's Marty's longtime doc producer, also co-produced this with us. And her and our archival team just started scouring the globe, literally, for footage. And what's interesting about, and I found this in a lot of films that I've worked on, as a subject sort of travels around the world, they are interviewed in different countries, no surprise. They go to London, they go to Japan, NHK is filming with them, BBC is filming with them. We have an amazing archival team that just started to unearth all this material. And in some cases, when we screened the film for Frank, including the clip that you just saw, it's, I don't want to speak for Frank, but he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that goes home at night and like YouTube's clips of himself and Jim from back in the day. So seeing him watch the movie and literally seeing footage that he had never seen before was so powerful. And the Norman Seeff interview, so Norman Seeff, great photographer, took that classic shot of Jim that ended up, I think, on a postage stamp, right? That's an example, and this is why I love working in docs. We were just about picture locked on this film. We were way down the road, and that archive hadn't emerged yet. It hadn't revealed itself to us. And the one thing we were kind of lacking in the movie was just Jim at sort of an older point in his life, or closer to his passing, being not so much reflective, but just sort of stating what he was working on and sort of how he approached things. And our archivist literally finds this VHS tape that had come from like the box of VHS tapes that someone had sent us, and it's like, oh my God, we found this clip. And then we tracked it back to the Norman Seeff, who's still alive, to his studio, and they had the master, and that ended up in the movie. So it just goes to show, like, you never know where this stuff's gonna come from.
So Lisa and Brian, like any creative career, there are highs. Well, maybe not every creative career has the same highs that Jim Henson did. And then there's also lows and misses, times where he took a big swing and it wasn't received the way he wanted it to. And we see in the film that, going through highs brings its own pressures, going through lows brings its own pressures. I wonder what you learned from the life and from seeing it encapsulated in the film about experiencing both highs and lows.
It's interesting because as his kids, he was such a positive person. He was one of those kind of parents that really wants to be positive all the time. So I only really thought about his creative disappointments and business disappointments when I was older. And I was, perhaps in a similar position to him. And I thought, wow, that must have hurt, if people didn't like Labyrinth when it came out, that must have hurt. Because he was very consciously like keeping a smile on his face most of the time. We learned, I got a different perspective on my mother from watching the movie. Ron created such a warm portrait of her. And I think there's so many people who have vaguely heard Jim Henson started in a partnership with his wife. But then what happened to her? What do we know about her? And she was an extraordinary person, lived till she was 78, became the grande dame of puppetry, and is a beloved figure in her own way, and her story has never been told.
Justin, can you shed light on that, about the deliberateness behind bringing out that story?
I'll really give Ron credit for that, because I think he clued into that early on through the interviews of just what a powerful force Jane was in Jim's life. There's actually the line in the movie where she says, well, I discovered Jim Henson, because in so many ways she did, when they were in college together. So Ron really pushed the team to bring out that relationship. And again, another instance of we were pretty far down the road in the edit, and I know Ron went back and did interviews with both of you to talk more about your experiences with her, but then we also found, I can't remember where it came from, but more audio from a previous interview that Jane had done, and she really didn't do a lot of interviews. It was, Jim barely did interviews, and Jane really didn't do interviews. And she talked pretty candidly about the relationship. She talked about this idea of a declaration of independence, which was her way of stating that this relationship is not working, in her own words. So that really brought that forward. But it was something, I think you just said it, where his two major partnerships and relationships in this movie and in life, one is with Frank and the other was with Jane.
That was Justin Wilkes, the producer of Jim Henson Idea Man, along with Lisa Henson and Brian Henson, who were featured in the film and continue to run the company founded by their father and mother. The film is streaming on Disney+. Now we turn to the greatest night in pop that covers the recording of We Are the World. It brought together a who's who of 1980s musicians. Lionel Richie was a co-writer of the song and also serves as the film's producer. Here he is in the trailer from Netflix.
I received this call from Harry Belafonte, and he wants to do some kind of a song for famine relief in Africa. Basically what he said was, I need you.
The film's director is Bao Nguyen, who was last on this podcast talking about his film Be Water about Bruce Lee. I asked what it meant for him to tell this history.
I was only 2 years old when the song came out, so I'm sort of dating myself in a way. But Lionel Richie was always part of my childhood. My parents were refugees from Vietnam, and I remember when they came over, they spoke very little English, but they would always play Lionel Richie records, they would always play Kenny Rogers records, and they would play We Are the World. And even though I was 2 years old when the song came out, that song became in many ways a cultural bridge for me between, my Vietnamese upbringing and my sort of American upbringing. And, having that sort of intimacy to Lionel and that, reverence because of what he helped do in my household, that was nerve-wracking. Speaking to people like Bruce Springsteen obviously is very nerve-wracking. But that was sort of my approach to this film as well, is taking these larger-than-life icons and seeing them be really nervous around each other or really anxious and wanting to do their best and humanizing them as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, even if we are Lionel Richie and Bob Dylan.
So Lionel Richie is also a producer on this project. What were those early conversations like with him? What do you think he was trying to capture?
Yeah, well, the film originally was supposed to be more of an ensemble story, right? But from my experience in the films that I love, less is more when you can just really focus on certain characters and their experiences through an event. And Lionel was the first interview that we did, and he ended up just talking for 4 hours, and he wanted to keep talking, but his manager's like, oh, we got to stop now, Lionel. And so sort of his generosity of opening up his experience made me think about, how he could become sort of the pseudo-narrator of the film, because he was one of the few people alive who can tell it from start to finish. Sadly, Ken Cragen is no longer with us, and Harry Belafonte is no longer with us. There's not that many people could have told that story, that huge story, with such intimacy from start to finish. And I mean, Lionel's such a great storyteller too, and so funny and so poignant. The very last line of the film, where he talks about coming home, and when you're coming home to your house, he's quoting his father, the house is there, but the people in the house are no longer there. And that, I forgot what question I was asking him, but when he told me that line, I knew that was going to be the end of the film. It was just such a poignant film, and we did most of the interviews at A&M Studios, which is now Henson Studios, right around the corner from here, and having people be able to walk into the room, 40 years later, and really feel the spirit of that night again when they were doing the interviews was really special.
And talk about the footage, like how was that footage recorded that night, and how did you gain access to it?
Well, there was a music video that is even as popular as the song in many ways. And there was a straight to television HBO Jane Fonda hosted TV special that came out right when the song came out. So my producer Julia Nottingham, she knew, because that special had been filmed and the music video had been filmed all in one night, that there must have been footage of other things that wasn't part of that hour-long special. And me and Julia had never worked on a music documentary. We had worked on the Bruce Lee project before, and we didn't know how to get a hold of this footage. Luckily, Julia was working with MRC, and MRC at the time owned Dick Clark Productions, who produced the American Music Awards. So MRC connected us with Larry Klein, who's in the film. He was a producer of the American Music Awards. And Julia, with the tenacity of a good producer, just cold called Larry and gave the elevator pitch. And Larry's like, "I've been waiting 35 years for this call," which is, as a documentary filmmaker, when you hear that answer, it's quite special. And he connected us to Larry connected us to Lionel and to USA for Africa, which was the entity that was for him that sort of stored all the footage and manages the financing for the fundraising. Sadly, a lot of the footage was lost or just not well preserved because they had no idea that 40 years later that Netflix would be around and wanted to do a documentary about it. So what was probably tens of hours of footage became single digits. And when I first came onto the project, it was supposed to be a lot more footage. And I had this idea where it was much more fly on the wall, much more in the vein of, say, like Peter Jackson's Get Back, where you're just observing the night. And when I found, when we kind of hit these hurdles, we sort of pivoted and made it, half the film is about the lead up to the night as well. And what we did was do a lot of recreations in the style of the original recordings. And I was very adamant that the recreations were immersive and you really felt like you were at that time. And we made sure that we got the exact same cameras that they shot the night of on, and just to give, again, that texture that doesn't make it feel like it's recreation. And so, yeah, we were just lucky to kind of get all that archival, which we actually found like 5 hours of archival in a person's car, in their trunk, that's been sitting there for 20 years. So make sure you look in everyone's trunk when you're making an archival film.
Well, I think you just erased my next question from my head, but blowing me away with that. You do pull out all these little sub-stories. Like there's the story about whether Prince is going to come that night, and a kind of poignant, sad aspect of that story is Sheila E. tells the story of feeling like she was really brought into that night as a lure to get Prince there, and kind of came away from that experience feeling like she was undervalued for who she was herself. How did you figure out all these stories? I mean, were most of these stories already well documented in other places, or how did you get to them?
Yeah, there was a book written by David Breskin, who was covering the night and the leading up to the night, the recording process for Life magazine. So he wrote a 80-page book about the process. And there have been a few, like, Esquire, there was a Rolling Stone article, but it kind of reiterated what David Breskin had said in the book. And they didn't, there was 46 artists who were involved in recording, and none of them, or I should say, not a lot of them had a say in the Breskin book. And so, with Prince not being around, sadly, we knew that we had to talk to someone who could, speak for Prince and also be a conduit for that story. And, I was well aware that I didn't want to be stuck in that room the whole time as a viewer. It might feel a bit claustrophobic, and thinking about all the different ways we can kind of build tension and sort of the what-ifs of the story. And Prince was one of the biggest what-ifs of all, the whole night. And so when we invited Sheila, we had done a pre-interview with Sheila, and she was very effusive about the whole night and the whole experience. But when we interviewed her at A&M Studios, I mean, she was still very effusive, and everyone that we talked to was pretty much said it was one of the best nights of their life. But we got to a point where she opened up and told us the story about how, Lionel and Quincy had promised her a solo part. And, at the time, you have Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, people who are quite legendary in their own right at that time. And Sheila was just kind of coming up at that moment, kind of being, coming out of the shadow of being Prince's drummer. And, she felt as the night progressed and as Prince sort of said that he didn't really want to be a part of it, that, the real sort of motive of luring Prince, she felt that she was being used. And that was like really honest moment of the film and honest moment of Sheila, and she told me afterwards that she had never told anyone that on camera. And also, to the credit of Lionel, who was a producer on the film, when I asked him, offline about it, and he's like, that's how it happened. And he had no qualms with leaving that line from Sheila in the film.
So you had pre-interviewed some people. Talk to me about the interview with Huey Lewis, who's really kind of gold in this film. What had you done a pre-interview with him? Did you know what to expect from that interview?
Yeah, we did do a pre-interview with just the kind of, we asked him generally what he remembered of the night, and nothing really specific. And he was just, as you see in the film, how giddy and excited he was to be there. And he now lives in Montana, I believe, and he flew in from Montana just for a couple days. And, he hadn't been in that room in 40 years. So when he walked back into that room, you could really see that energy and that spirit of Huey. And, sadly, Huey has lost his hearing. So he no longer tours, but he's still that same ball of energy that I can imagine he was in the 80s. And it was really funny because he gave us, 2 or 3 hours of his time. His son lives in LA, and he had to go meet us. We did the interview in the morning, and we had a few more interviews that day. And he had to meet his son around 4 o'clock, and he's like, do you mind if I just stick around and just hang out while I wait for my son? And do you need help? Do you need me to move any sandbags and C-stands? And he was just the nicest person. But I think he, being in that room again meant so much for him, to him, I should say.
And then I want to ask you about the Bruce Springsteen interview, because he was definitely a figure. Well, they talk about in the film that when he said yes to this project, and he just was coming off a tour, flew from a blizzard in New York to be here, and his presence had helped wrangle other people, I believe. If he's doing it, then then this must be a serious thing. What did it take to get him to participate in the project?
I mean, I think in many ways it was, art imitating life or life imitating art, and that once Lionel was on board, Lionel was the one who called Bruce personally to tell him how much this project meant to him and that he wanted for us to talk to him. And, as I mentioned, most of the interviews are shot at A&M Studios. One of the few ones that weren't shot was Bruce Springsteen's. We ended up shooting at his farm in New Jersey. And that was the gardener's office, is what it's called. It was just very surreal walking into Bruce Springsteen's room and his home, and being able to talk to him about that night. And it was very matter of fact. If you watch the film, you can tell that he doesn't have the same effusiveness as Huey or Lionel, but he says everything that's, again, very honest to his experience. And I kind of share his feelings about the song and what, when he says, you can judge the song aesthetically, but at the end of the day, it was a tool, and he was there to kind of help provide a tool to save, or help save people in Africa at that time. And so I'm so glad that he was part of the film, because, again, he added this counterbalance to everyone else who, again, was very, very effusive of the night. And not to say that he wasn't happy to be there, but he realized that type of song is not a typical Springsteen song, I would say.
So as I wrap this up, what did this film mean to share with your family who had grown up on this song?
Yeah, I mean, I my parents are divorced from each other, so we had a Sundance premiere, and I had to figure out which parent was going to go to which premiere. And so my mom went to the Sundance premiere, and my dad came to the LA premiere. And my mom was so excited. They both actually live in Vietnam again. And I should say, when I was going to visit them in Vietnam, that's how I kind of made the final decision to make the film. Given, I was 2 years old, and I always questioned whether or not I'm the right person to tell a story. And I got into a Vietnamese a taxi cab. The 60-year-old Vietnamese taxi cab driver speaks no English. He puts on a mix CD, and the first song that plays is "We Are the World." And so I was like, okay, that's definitely like one of those documentary gods telling me I should do this film. But we're so lucky that Netflix had a global launch of the film. My parents could finally see one of my films with Vietnamese subtitles, which meant the world to me, because they've seen films of mine from the past, but to be able to see it with subtitles of their own language meant they could actually understand every single part of it.
That was Bao Nguyen, the director of The Greatest Night in Pop. You can watch it on Netflix. Our final film, In Restless Dreams, the music of Paul Simon, is streaming on MGM+. Oscar-winning director Alex Gibney explores the extraordinary career that began with Simon and Garfunkel and grew into decades of solo work. The framing of this film is Paul Simon recording his most recent album, 7 Psalms.
What I've learned is that when you find a thing that produces a feeling of peace or joy, try and hold on to it. It's like bliss. That's music for me.
Alex Gibney frequently works on investigative films where he's driven to uncover something hidden. I asked, what was the quest driving him in this portrait?
Well, in this one, it was really about his search. I mean, he was going on a journey. He was inspired in a dream to make an album called 7 Psalms, and he embarked on it. And then as he was embarking on it, he lost most of the hearing in one of his ears. And that was powerful. And
That's not something you knew at the beginning of this process?
No, not really. I mean, I knew that he was working on the album, and I knew that he was having hearing trouble. But the more we got into it, the more that was evident, and it was evident how difficult it was for him to kind of work through that. So because the whole project started as a kind of discussion with Paul as to whether or not there was a film to be done about his overall career, but it opened up when it became about something in the present, that is to say, making this new album. And the album was a way of both looking at him in the present, but also looking forward and looking back, because a lot of it is about mortality. There's a verse in the album called, where there's a line called Trail of Volcanoes, which I took to be memories. So it was investigating that determination to continue to create even in the midst of struggle, and how to make that struggle part of the art. That was really intriguing to me. It became a film about art making.
And what was it like to be in the studio with Paul Simon? And in the film, we see him like trying out different weird sounds, being on an exploration. I can imagine that some of that watching in real time would be like, what is this guy doing? I guess I would trust that it's Paul Simon. He's got a 50-year career of making these things work, but but the making of art is often not as exciting as the art itself.
Maybe. I mean, I think if you spend the time, you find that, and you sort of put the pieces together after the fact, you find the bits and pieces of the art or the exploration that seem to add up to the finished work in a way that was powerful. I mean, there was a lot of searching going on. As he said, he was looking, or he was trying to find the edge of what he could hear. He was always exploring. So that aspect of it was really interesting, because it had never really occurred to me. It's like, okay, you sit down, you write a song, you write the lyrics, maybe you have a few chords first, but the idea of playing with sounds or exploring sounds that you think, oh, that's interesting, that's also interesting, they don't seem to go together, but there's something about that lyric, and you begin to allow them to flow through you, almost as if it's a kind of a magical process. And indeed, it was kind of resonant with my own filmmaking process, which is to say that at some point along the way when you're making a doc, which is a little bit like making, a scripted film, except you write the script at the end instead of the beginning. At some point, you begin to feel that the film is telling you how to make it. And if you're not listening to the film, you do so at your peril. And I think Paul, his method of exploring and searching for sounds and phrases, and sometimes very weird sounds, that was really intriguing to me, because you realize that he's also trying to let the songs play him to some extent.
So, as you were making this film, what did you feel the film telling you about how to make it?
Well, one thing it told me was it should be free-flowing in terms of time and space. So instead of like day 5 rehearsals, and do a scene, we when we cut it together, and Andy Grieve, my longtime collaborator, was the editor of this, did a great job. So we decided that as he's making the song in the present, that we would blend time and space. And so he would do one phrase in Wimberley, Texas, and another phrase in New York that would follow on as if it's uninterrupted, but now there are, new instruments. And also at certain moments in time, it would be appropriate to flash back to an earlier moment that seemed to harmonize what was going on in the present. So it was that idea of a kind of dreamscape that allowed a kind of free-flowing sense of time and space that was what the film started to tell us.
Well, there's an amazing moment of that near the beginning of the film where he's being asked in present time about filming, and he expresses that he's a little self-conscious. He's playing something, and you ask him, how's it feel to play that? He said, well, I'm kind of thinking about the cameras. And then you cut to archival footage from maybe 40 or more years ago where he's in a studio and someone's asking about the presence of cameras, and he says, cameras, like, I'm always around cameras, I don't mind. I mean, how did you find that juxtaposition?
Well, you do a deep dive in the archive, and suddenly you find this little bit in the archive, and it occurs to you, wow, that's a lot. That has a lot to do with what we just found about what we just shot. And that's the process where you start to put it together. And then there's a couple of levels to that. Has he grown less comfortable with the cameras, or is he always thinking about the cameras as you're shooting him? And is that part of what's going on in the present? So there were a series of different layers to that, but no doubt that we would go hunting for stuff and then find ways of connecting with the present. Or in some cases, I remember he would tell a story. He told a story about how at this famous, Graceland Band concert in Harare, Zimbabwe, just over the border from South Africa, that he played You Can Call Me Al, and then right afterwards they asked him to play it again right away. And he didn't want to, and he said, no, man, you're gonna do it. I thought, well, that sounds like a good story, but did that really happen? Well, we had this archive, we had the concert outs, and we were able to go back and find that moment, put it together, so that kind of stuff, can be magical.
I mean, you're really expressing here what the power of an archive is. I mean, sometimes we think of archive as, just something that's going to solve a
You think of it as B-roll.
Right.
Yeah, it's the opposite of B-roll. It's when you start to explore the archive, you're finding stories that were buried. And one of the stories we found in this film was he had made a 16-millimeter film with Charles Grodin as the director called Songs of America, and we show some of it in the movie. But we discovered that in his archive were all the dailies and 16-millimeter and mag track unsunk, so we had to actually digitize them before we even knew what was there. But one of the things we discovered was this unbelievably beautiful footage of him and Art Garfunkel working with their engineer, Roy Halley, in the studio. And you can see this guy working these dials like a kind of magician, creating this stuff in the studio. And you understood suddenly all the stories about how they made those records, but that was just pure discovery. You go looking for stuff, you're not quite sure what you may find, and you have to adjust according to what you do.
Paul Simon, throughout his career, had a reputation of being difficult. And I wonder, what you came to learn about him specifically as a person who's labeled difficult, and also what it kind of means when an artist is labeled difficult. Is that them being difficult, or is that being them being true to themselves as an artist in a world that wants them to be something different?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I would have to say that in my case, he wasn't difficult with me, but that may have been because of my job. I mean, I'm there to make a film about him, so why would he want to be difficult? But he was also...
No one's ever been difficult with you that you're trying to make a film about?
They have been. But he was generous too in terms of letting the cameras in there at moments where, because of his health, things were extremely challenging, and it didn't always look that good for him, particularly musically. But I think for Paul, he's stubborn. He's also a perfectionist. He has that phrase, the ear goes to the irritant. And he keeps digging in. And sometimes he can also be quite blunt with people. Like, it's like, well, I didn't really like that. And he's not meaning to be personal. Like, I don't like you. It's just, I didn't like that. And he's not sugarcoating it. He's just saying it like it is. There's a moment like that in the film where he's talking to this group called Voces 8. They're a vocal group out of England. And he said, that was unsatisfying to me. You're thinking, whoa, dude. But he said, in the conception, not the execution, because maybe he saw the cameras there. But I suspect that that's one of the things that people found difficult about Paul, because he's really, he has high ambitions for what he's doing, and sometimes the honesty about whether it's working or not may brand him as difficult.
One of the poignant things about this album and in the film is to see him collaborate with his wife, Edie Brickell. It's like she has a moment on the album Seven Psalms where she performs. I don't know if they've ever done that together or not before. But can you talk about about their relationship, which is a relationship that people could raise questions about? She was much younger than him.
Yes, much younger, and they met. They met on Saturday Night Live. She flubbed the lines to her own hit song when she saw Paul Simon, behind the monitor. But their relationship over the years has become very powerful and very deep. And so there were a couple of interesting moments in the film where we were just hanging out, and she was singing her part, and you can kind of feel he's just kind of, as he's listening to her, and I always find it interesting to photograph people listening. He's listening to her, and as he's listening to her, his body language is kind of moving with her voice in a way that was powerful. They were still discovering, like he was listening to something that she was doing that was new, but also there was a deep familiarity and love between them that I found very moving.
So as I wrap this up, what was it like showing them the film?
Well, for a long time, Paul claimed he never saw the film, which is not exactly true. I showed him the deal was that I could make the film that I wanted to make. And actually, we had made a deal for the music and everything else ahead of time, so I could make the film I wanted to make, but I wanted him to see it, and if I had gotten anything wrong, I wanted to know about it. And generally speaking, he was very pleased with the film, and so was Edie, and I think they were also quite pleased with the way it portrayed their relationship. So it was a happy ending. That's not always the way it's been with some of my films, let's just say.
That was Alex Gibney, the director of In Restless Dreams, the music of Paul Simon. It's now streaming on MGM+. I want to thank all of our guests and the partners who made this event possible: Disney+, FX, MGM+, Netflix, and Peacock. Thanks to Janice Min, London Sanders, and the Ankler team for creating this documentary spotlight and inviting Pure Nonfiction to be a part of it. We recently launched a newsletter called Doc Voices, written by Anisha Javeri. You can subscribe to it on Substack. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan, partnership manager Bella Racklin, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Rafaela Nahausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.